All right, it's June 3rd community architecture call for Konflux. Ryan, you've got the first point, go for it.
All right, thanks, Ralph. Yeah, so I wanted to discuss shifting the logic for whether we release something right from the integration service to the release service. I know that back when we were going to be upstreaming all of Konflux, this was an important part of decoupling, and it hasn't really been discussed, but I'm wondering if it still might have value now. The reason is the reason this came up most recently is there was a user feature request regarding having more granular control over whether auto releases are created. And this request, as it stands right now, would impact both the release service and the integration service. Changes would have to be made to both services. It seems like this is since it's about releasing, it's a release service concern. So changes to how things are released, whether things are released, should be handled by the release service. In addition, I think this is conceptually simpler for users and people in support, knowing who to tag when users have issues related to releasing. And frankly, it makes the development process a little bit easier. If you have a feature like this feature request, it can just be handled quickly, quietly by the release team without having to drag in lots of other teams from Konflux for approvals, because it only impacts the release service. Now, obviously, there would be some trade-offs to doing this. Obviously, it's essentially a big refactor, so that's additional work. And then also the release service would have to have a snapshot controller that checks or that basically gets notified when the snapshots are marked as completed and either passed or failed by the integration service. I don't know what the overhead is for another controller on the cluster. I know, for example, we have probably half a dozen different pipeline run controllers. But if there's a performance concern there, then we probably shouldn't pursue this. But regardless, I'm open to thoughts if anybody wants to weigh in here.
Yeah, I mean, I can weigh in on the release service side of things. I think that it should stay a part of decoupling, which is, as far as I know, pretty low on the priority list and should not be done anytime before that. As far as one point you made was it makes it clear of who to reach out to for when things happen with the release. But if the release isn't created, then I don't think it makes it clear at all. So if we go forward with this, then you have a snapshot and the user will say, I have no release. And I don't see how that's clear. I mean, it could have failed an integration test scenario. It could have failed on Conforma as part of an integration test scenario. Other things could have happened. Currently, the entry is if you have a release CR that is failing, tag the release team. If you do not tag them. So I think it's much simpler now. As far as the cross-team collaboration stuff for a feature, I don't really see eye to eye on that one either. The auto-release functionality in the integration service was contributed by the release team. I actually personally was the one who wrote it. So we can have this, we could create a feature for this feature request, and it could be just a release thing. That doesn't mean it has to only go in the release service controller. It could still include things in the integration service controller, because that's how we did auto release in the first place.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I actually wasn't aware of that. Yeah, that's fair. If there's enough knowledge of how the cross features or cross services work for release to contribute to integration and vice versa, then I think that's completely fine.
Yeah, it may be a minority opinion, but I personally liked contributing to integration service, and I've also contributed to GitOps back when we had that, and I enjoyed that because it makes it easier for me to know how the larger process works, and it's easier to support users when you have a broader perspective of not just what your team does, but the other teams do as well. So I thought it was a good thing that we did that. So I don't know all the details of this feature, but I think it would be better for this feature to make it just a release feature and have someone from this team contribute to integration service for it, so that whoever that person is gets more insight in integration service, instead of having an integration service person do that part of it and the release service team do that part of it.
Yeah, that's fair. I completely agree with the cross-team collaboration aspects and the decreasing siloing. My concern is more with frankly, the bureaucratic aspect of things. If you have a feature request that's just for something small that's entirely contained within the release service, you can kind of create an epic and prioritize it on your own time. Whereas if you have something that impacts multiple services, we have to create a feature, we have to do a feature refinement, we have to get lots of input, so it delays the time in which we can start the feature by weeks. Honestly, maybe the better solution is to figure out how we can streamline that process in cases like this. Ralph, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'd say I think we can have our own opinion about how we want to be structured and organized and divide our lines and so on in our culture. I think the best practice is that you want teams to be able to do almost everything they can do on their own without having to coordinate with other teams, while at the same time having a mindset that you're happy to contribute to other teams. So like I like, Johnny, your perspective that you like contributing to other teams. At the same time, I'm like what you're saying, Ryan, about trying to think about, is there anything we can do to kind of streamline, like reorganize our technical assets so that like the way we need to make changes in the future is easier. And that gets me to my question, which is this aspect of integration service today, which is responsible for creating the releases. How frequently has that needed to change? Is it undergoing changes like currently? And are we going to expect more changes in it in the future? Because that would like not determine, but that would influence like how fast or soon we would want to make any change, like a decoupling change here, if we're hitting like bureaucratic hurdles, like you were talking about, Ryan.
Yeah, right now I don't think we've had a lot of changes required. Hopefully, if this feature, we can talk about this feature a little bit more separately if we want, but this is separate from this point. But we hopefully, if we implemented more granular control over releases, we wouldn't need to make any other changes. From that point, it might just be like users asking for additional cell mappers or things like that. But there is a lot of not a lot, a moderate amount of confusion about how releases work in the integration service, or how they're triggered, I should say, amongst users. So yeah, hopefully we don't have a lot of changes required. And if what we have now is the least confusing to users and to engineers supporting, I think that it's worth keeping it as is.
Cool. Any other comments or questions?
I would just say on the Jira part of things, it'd be nice if like for in times like this, we could say, yes, this touches integration service, but the release service is going to own it and not have to like pull in all the integration service Jira aspect type of things.
Yeah.
And actually related to the bureaucratic process for small features like this that are, let's say this is implemented, this might have a UI change too, but let's say this ends up being like an integration service ticket, a UI ticket, and a release epic, and all of that can be handled by the release team, but basically it still needs a sign off by someone from integration, someone from UI saying, yeah, this is fine. Could we, in these scenarios, not do things to streamline the refinement process, decrease the number of reviews required, maybe make it so that we don't need architects to sign off on smaller features like this, that you guys are enablers of our own sign-offs rather than having to dive into everything yourselves, things like that. Like I think often feature refinements take about a month to get approved, and frankly, I think that's just too long for the pace we develop.
I agree. Yeah, I wish it was way faster. One thing, I agree with the spirit of what you're saying, Ryan, for sure. One thing we did recently was we just changed the text for all the architects review subtasks to have optional at the beginning to convey that you don't need to wait for us.
Oh, okay, that's awesome.
Yeah. I want the same thing. I want to keep the subtasks because it's useful for me to like be a queue that I can use to try to catch up with what everybody's doing and review the documents. But I don't want any of the execution to like block or wait on us unless you like feel like you want or need us, on some issue.
Yeah, that's great. Cool.
Mm. Regarding like a thing that like from where I look at things, in the Jira process, if like, okay, let's say it's making a change to integration service, but release service is going to do it, we always put the two components on it, integration and release. And so it appears as if integration has this like feature on the board, on their slice of the board. And as we get bigger and bigger and there's more and more people contributing to Konflux, like the frequency of that, of like features that are like in a team's swim lane, but which are not really being worked on by the people in that team, is growing a lot. Sometimes for some teams, it's like half the items on the board. And so it becomes like crowded and you can't like make decisions about You can't use the board to like tell easily what's most important to do next. And I don't have a good way to solve that, right? Like, what indicators should we think about using in Jira other than the component to say like, well, this has something to do with integration service, but really it's release services concern. Release teams concern, is what I mean, sorry. Bruno?
I've been actually thinking about this for the last couple of weeks, and I think that the current concept of having components for features currently means two things. It means both people need from that component need to review this, and that this component will be a part of the solution for the feature. And in a lot of cases, as I said, for integration team 2, around half of our features are we needed to give an egg, but don't really have stuff to do apart from sometimes a story or something like that. And definitely not an epics word for that feature. So there is a big crowding of that. And I think that it does stem from assigning a component to a feature basically means two different things for different features.
Mm-hmm. Could I suggest that maybe it means three different things? It means people from that team need to review it. It means that the technical assets of that team are going to be involved somehow. And it might mean that the people on that team are expected to contribute to that. But it could mean any combination of those three. We just need to review, but nothing else. Or your system is going to be involved, but somebody else is going to contribute that. You know, or you're being expected, or you're being asked, requested to deliver the solution in that project.
Yeah, that's a good point. That basically boils down to three different things. I agree. Ryan?
Oh, I was actually going to say the exact same thing Ralph said. I think there are three different things. And rather than having a component field, maybe we should split it into I don't know, stakeholder is the wrong word, but like a primary and secondary stakeholder type field where you have, if you have a feature, like let's say this feature that we were talking about with the release changes, the release would be the primary stakeholder or the primary contributor because they're the ones who do the bulk of the work. Integration and UI might be secondary contributors because they have either a tiny bit of work to support it or there's work related to their service that release is just going to do. And then, of course, things like what Kurno was talking about with the features where the integration team only has to provide reviews. That's the same thing. We're secondary contributors. This one allows us to kind of visibly split out that work so that it's not clogging boards when we, when we're going through the dashboards. And two, I think it also allows us to more clearly say, especially for UI and Conforma, because I think they're victims of this a lot. Like, oh, this is something where there's only one story, and the integration team has you doing that one story, but it gives them a little bit more visibility and a little bit more power to be like, hey, integration team, do you want to learn how to contribute to our code base? Do you want to learn how to do this yourself? Because that can take work off of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love to see more contributions to the UI from backend teams to like complete and round out the feature that you're working on. Like tangentially to related to all this is just observe that we're like talking about Red Hat Jira things, but we're in the community call for Konflux. Months ago, we I think arrived at the point where we intend to open up our Jira project to be public, but I think we haven't made concrete progress on actually opening that up. I'll follow up with Eric and Gal offline, who I think were some of the two that were mainly interested in the outcome of that. See where we're at with that. Any other comments? Okay, let's switch to the second point in the agenda, and I'll check the doc to see if anybody's added anything else. Where are we? It's only one, which is this ADR. Ryan, you had submitted it, and and it's here. I was thinking about, we were coming up to the architecture call, and there were no topics on the agenda, and we often use it as like a clearinghouse for discussions like the one we just had. but we have like this backlog of ADRs that we get to asynchronously when we can. I'd like to use this call whenever we have extra time to try to burn down at least one of the ADRs to make sure we're doing good by our own process, that things aren't just kind of rotting there and not getting the review that they should. So to that end, let's look at this one. I'll screen share. And Ryan, do you want to introduce the gist? Would you mind?
Yeah, so by the way, Andrew and Ralph, I know you both had some comments on here. I hadn't seen them until shortly before this meeting, so I apologize for not having gotten to them.
All good.
So this is related to the feature Konflux 3812, which is for supporting migrating build time security scans into the integration service. So basically, the problem is twofold. The first is that some users have been complaining that their build time security scans take a long time, namely ClamAV and Claire. They want to know whether their build has passed more quickly. They don't want to have to wait around for an hour and a half for a security scan to know whether a build that took a few minutes has passed. And they think that by moving those scans into the integration pipeline, they can run them in parallel with their integration tests that take a long time, and therefore speed up their overall build test workflow execution time. The other advantage here is, separation of concerns. These security scans are technically tests. We had them in the build pipeline because that was the only way we could gate on them basically previously. So this change is proposing enabling gating for tests in the integration service so that we can move those tasks into the build pipeline, speed things up for users, and also more clearly delineate what's a build and what's a test for users that care about that.
Yeah, I'll say that I remember when we were first getting started that I frequently would say a mouthful when explaining the architecture of Konflux. At first, you get a build pipeline, and then under my breath, I would say it's really a build and scan pipeline, right? Because it's like it played both roles, and this is interesting in the way it formalizes separating those two. We didn't have a way to do it without attestations, and that's the core problem to solve here: how to produce attestations for those scan and test tasks.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And go ahead, Louis.
I was going to bring up another topic on this topic, a subtopic. So if you want to wrap up, answer, Rob, go ahead.
Louis, do you want to talk about this ADR, or do you want to go off into
ADR?
ADR.
Yeah. Maybe I should just say at this point. Okay. So I just added a comment. So one of the things that should work, but it doesn't right now, is that if you do have the source of provenance being created by both the build and the integration pipeline, there are some issues that will happen in Conforma. Conforma is not doing the right thing. It should be fixed. But I just want to raise the awareness of that, because if we start doing that today, I believe one of the issues that we saw is that we have this set of required tasks, like the builder task is a required task.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to complain that you don't have the builder task on your integration task pipeline, which is obviously not the correct behavior. So we just need it should be a somewhat straightforward change, I think, but I just want to bring visibility to it.
Yeah, so there were a couple things that were changed in the feature refinement document that I didn't go back and change in the ADR, and this might have been one of them. So I think what we agreed on was that Conforma would basically have two separate lists of required tasks. It would have tasks that were required only in the build pipeline. The build task, of course, is one of those, or a trusted build task, and then tasks that were required generally. And these can be run in the integration pipeline or in the build pipeline. And I think our agreement was regarding collisions. If things are run more than once, that for a given test, Conforma would always use the most recent attestation for that test. Yeah, Louis?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You probably. I need to review that feature doc, but another approach too is that just mix them together, and then if the required task is in either, it should be fine. I think that is probably okay as well. Obviously, that will open up for things like you could build an image and integration test, but I think realistically that will be other challenges if anyone tries to do that. So maybe a simpler approach that we can at least start with is just get a list of all the tasks in all the attestations, and then just evaluate that instead of evaluating each provenance individually. Especially something like trusted artifacts, we don't lose any of the guarantees with a hamper of source code of artifacts that way. So just something to think about. I'm sure that will. I'll review that feature refinement doc too.
Okay, great. And when you do that, please keep in mind from conformist perspective, the integration test can be rerun, and any attestations generated in that rerun would be attached to the same image. So when you look at that feature, please keep that in mind and point out if you see anything where that would cause problems with Conforma. I think we addressed it in the feature refinement. I just want to make sure.
I think it's addressed too. I just want to share for everyone else's maybe benefit that I was really confused with this one when we first started talking about it, trying to think about that problem Louis was mentioning or something similar to it, that if you had an integration test that really built the image and pushed it, how would we be able to tell? And it's that if you can find a build pipeline that has all the required steps, and if it advertises that it built the image, we just have to be sure that nobody can trick our build task into exposing an arbitrary pull spec saying that it built something else, allowing them to build in an integration test doing something untoward, something unapproved. If they can trick our build pipeline into reporting that it built the same thing, then Conforma will pass all of that, and we can't allow that. So that's, yeah.
Now, Kruno, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to mention that this effort also would unblock also another big effort, which is to introduce operator testing, which also should be gateable. And operator testing can only be done in integration tests, since it requires functional tests to be run, such as operator SDK, scorecards, deployment tests, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then one other thing that's considerably lower priority that it unblocks is DAST scanning, dynamic application security testing. Needs to be run in the integration service because it requires deployments. Right now, we can't gate on it. So if we do want to begin gating on it, this will allow us to do that. I do want to add that there is one more thing that has changed since I last updated this ADR, which is the way in which the integration service is enabling serialization. So we were looking at a couple different options for that, but one thing we originally didn't want to do is implement a full, like a DAG type of thing that would allow users to serialize their integration tests however they wanted. For a couple of reasons. First of all, most serialization should occur within pipelines. You should be using tasks for that. Tecton's already very good at handling that. But also, we thought it was a lot to take on, and we thought it should be a separate feature. We decided to take it on. We have since decided that this was actually the best way to implement this. Mm-hmm. So I think the original ADR said that full serialization is out of scope, and now we are implementing that, and we're trying to do it in such a way that the user experience for that serialization, for that DAG, basically looks the same as the DAG for the new application component model. So it's conceptually simple.
Cool. I was just reviewing this before the meeting. It says that there's going to be something about serialization, but the exact mechanism is to be determined. So it's just kind of
yeah, that was determined. We finished that last week, so I'll go in and fix this.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, Mikla.
So do we have any plans regarding completely moving those checks to integration tests. Like, does it make sense to set some transitional period for the users? Or we can try to came up with some migration tools that would just move those scans into a test pipeline. So this way we wouldn't need, I believe, to maintain like these options like search for a task, maybe in build pipeline, maybe in test pipeline. So to get rid of this maybe and uncertainties, plus if some users would stick to old models, some users to new model, we would have to maintain both of them, which is additional problems, additional bugs and stuff. So in my opinion, we should set some timeline and move users like first. It should be like opt-in my opinion, and some trying out, and then we can migrate other users, and if needed, built-in could assist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. The problem right now is that we don't have the sort of like ability to create default integration test pipelines and keep them up to date in the same way that we do with the build pipeline. Because we don't have a tool like Pack that's going into users' repos, updating their pipeline definition. Or I guess we could expand Maker to do it, but we don't have that in place right now. So if users want to move ClamAV to the integration pipeline, for example, they are going to be responsible for keeping that up to date. That's something that we can implement. I don't know that it should be in the scope for this feature, or if it should be a feature afterwards to improve the user experience around this. Louis?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because it does open up the whole can of worms of like, how do you update the integration tests in a way that, because right now with the build pipeline, the user has full control over when updates happen.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you like that feature or not, I think it's some people do like that. Most people do like that, I think. So removing that ability from a user, I think, will be problematic. I don't know what's the best way to do that is, but I think maybe it's a naive approach, but I think supporting adding a particular test on either the build pipeline or integration test, I was under the impression that that was going to be something that we just support going forward. I wasn't thinking of finding a way to kind of like streamline that or make things more consistent. I think that's a good question, but I think maybe that's something that can be deferred until we have a better way of managing integration test updates, for example.
Bruno, I think you were next.
Yeah, I think that the effort of keeping integration tests, test pipelines up to date in the same manner as build pipelines will be made easier by the fact that we are starting to support pipeline run definitions as part of integration service. So you can have basically a one-to-one move for the task instead of moving it into a pipeline, referencing it in a different manner, and then needing to do quite a lot of finagling. And I think that would also make MintMaker's job easier if in future it would need to maintain or update integration pipeline runs.
I don't see how pipeline runs versus pipelines changes things here, because you can still have a task ref in both, right? And they're defined the same.
You do, but I think it makes it that much easier because it's a one-to-one move.
Okay. Mikola, I think you're next.
Yes, thank you. In addition to Kruno's words, I'm thinking maybe we could have some sort of managed pipeline and just reference the test pipeline in integration testing. Like currently, pipeline as code allows to run a sub pipeline in a pipeline. so we can manage and keep up to date of the required scanning. And honestly, for I believe majority of the team it would work, because majority of the teams just uses standard policy defined in the cluster or Konflux admin, at least to the instances we already know. So keeping such a task potentially could make life easier, but yeah, just thoughts topic to discuss as well.
I didn't understand, Mikola. Can you explain more? Were you suggesting to have a managed pipeline that users would refer to from their build pipeline?
No. I mean, currently we have number of checks in build pipeline, and they are mandatory. Users cannot just remove it, otherwise Conforma would fail. And those are placed in build pipeline and again mandatory. What if we, like the plan currently is to allow users to move them out into integration test. But anyway, if we would allow users to manage their integration test pipeline, what I'm saying is that for many users, it would be the same default pipeline with the same required tasks. And only a few users would customize it like to their needs. So taking into account that pipeline as code allows us to run a sub pipeline. So we can have it like integration test pipeline that invokes sub pipeline with those required checks. And those sub pipeline is managed by us, Konflux maintainers. So it's always up to date because we are updating it and users only reference it. But if a user wants to add additional check, fine. They just add the check to their pipeline and don't touch this sub pipeline reference to our managed pipeline. So that's what I'm trying to say. And yes, obviously some users might want to change this, but I believe it wouldn't be so often case because they can have those required checks and they can add additional checks. So that should cover majority of cases.
So like it's in a way, it's about the granularity of the thing they're referring to. Are they going to refer to the individual tasks in integration test pipelines, or will they refer to a whole pipeline that runs the particular testing tasks that we provide as a kind of larger unit of testing that they can invoke? In either case, whether it's a smaller granularity or larger granularity, I wanted to comment on the comment that Louis made. I think at the point in time where we were just trying to figure out, is this a thing we're going to let some users opt into, but we'll expect that it's like a minority use case and most users will still have things in the build pipeline? Or are we going to expect that like every team eventually migrates to having all of their tests run as integration test pipelines? In either way, there's like this fragmented experience we got to think about dealing with, that like we depend on. Some people, I think, don't like that this is the case, but I think it's true that we depend on Renovate proposing updates to the build and scanning tasks to our users to weed out bugs that we don't catch in our own CI and our own quality process, that users won't merge them if they're failing CI. And we learn about some things this way, preventing breaking users' main, but also generating noise for users. Like it or not, it's just a fact of how the system works today. With some of these things moving into integration tests, like how can that process happen? Let's say we just move Claire, and let's say the user is keeping it's not a managed pipeline. Let's say they're keeping a reference to Claire in their Git repo. When Renovate updates that reference to Claire and they're using it in an integration test scenario, will that cause integration service to perform like an execution of that task? Like, can they get CI feedback on that if they're keeping integration test pipelines in their own repo or in some other repo?
Yes, they can.
If it's the same repo.
Only if it's the same repo as the component. As some component. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Thank you. I think Ryan and then Kruno.
So I wanted to mention both Mikola and Ralph here talking about the granularity. And Mikola, you mentioned that Pipelines as Code has the ability to run pipelines in pipelines. I think that's something that Tecton had an ADR to support more broadly at one point, and it says it's been implemented, but I don't think it actually has. I think there's a lot of value for us in that, because we could create a scanning task pipeline that has all the SAST scanners and ClamAV and all that, and we could just have that referenced in the build pipeline run. And if users want to migrate all of their scanners over to the integration service, they just have to migrate one pipeline ref to be inside of one of their pipelines. Is there any way we can put some pressure on Tecton to either implement that or decide that they're not going to?
Well, we can ask. I don't know about pressure.
Yeah, pressure might be the wrong word,
Yeah.
but so what is our avenue of doing that? Like, do we have Tecton contributors and maintainers at Red Hat who we can reach out directly, or should we just be filing an issue
So
on GitHub and hoping it gets picked up?
sorry to cut crew in line here, but I just want to chime in to say that the release service already currently starts pipeline runs from inside task runs. So I think this already works. I didn't do it myself. Scott Haber was the architect behind it, but so I don't know if there's any like Tecton flag, you know, switch or anything that can fake, but we currently, we create pipeline runs from inside of other task runs, which is always inside of a larger pipeline run. So we already have pipelines and pipelines working.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, in that case, I guess I'll poke around, try to experiment with that at some point, because I think that's really valuable here for the scanning migration.
And your question about influencing or putting pressure on Tecton, I mean, like Louis said it in sidebar, let's start a conversation upstream. That should always be default and first. And then we can also talk to our colleagues at Red Hat about it if we need to, like, whatever, talk extra about it, but upstream transparent conversation is best.
Gotcha. Cool.
Let them know we're interested, right? We're a user who'd like to use that. Kruno and the Mikola.
Yeah, the conversation has kind of moved, but I just wanted to point out that one thing about the integration tests is that you can have multiple integration tests that run at different times, either in parallel or in future in serial. So we can also utilize that to have users run their custom tests at whatever point they want. One of the benefits, I think, of this approach is that you can run your security scans first, run the conforma check after that to make sure that everything is working, there are no viruses or whatever. And then you can be reasonably certain that you can run your functional tests after that without deploying something that's potentially unsafe into a system.
Cool. Mikola?
Yeah, back to the proposal of switching the ref between build and test pipeline for the scans. So I don't think it would make much sense, in my opinion, because that would cause like possible two-steps migration instead of one-step migration. So like if we need to, for example, we would like to put all the scans in a sub pipeline and update all existing pipelines, like bothering the users with this. And then we would ask them, so maybe you would like to move it into test pipeline, which is another migration. Easier, but still a migration and manual actions from user. So I would honestly do it as single move from build to test pipeline. And yeah, again, maybe repeating myself, but I really believe that we should have defined place for the checks. And looks like the best place is a test pipeline to run those checks. So, and as I say, if needed, build team can assist in migration. So
I agree that it makes the most sense to have these checks in the integration service. In some cases, we will have to get confirmation with ProdSec. For example, ProdSec was originally resistant to moving ClamAV into the integration service until we worked out some details about how Konflux works with them. That said, is that something that we can do? That sounds like a big undertaking. I don't know if it's something we can do as a part of this feature or something where we should roll this feature out let the power users who are complaining about this experiment with it. And then once it's had time to soak, then move that default over.
Yeah, I'll say I like that too. We can learn from it, but we need to make sure, I guess, to follow up on Mikola's idea to make it the one true way if we get enough feedback that it's workable.
Yeah, Mikola, can you create a feature for that so that we have it in the backlog?
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you.
Kuno.
Yeah, Kuno?
This is a bit out of the scope, but I think our ultimate goal is to have a different kind of provenance, which would be a attestation or provenance, sorry. Because we are also looking at having snapshots as artifacts, as OCR artifacts uploaded, and so they can be attested. And the test could be then associated with them. So it would be a different kind of attestations. And I think that in the future, once, let's say, all of the dust from this feature and a follow-up feature where we migrate stuff has settled, we could then dictate this is a test. It needs to be run as a test and attested in that way. Because currently we are double dipping in the in the world of this was built and tested as part of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And that for me opens up a whole bunch of like subsidiary questions or extra questions. Like, if we're gonna do a test attestation, we kind of also want to be doing an SBOM attestation. Right now we just attach the SBOM, but like support for attaching SBOMs and cosign is deprecated, and we're going to be on the trailing end of that curve unless we make a change there. So that the tooling suggests or recommends that you do an SBOM attestation. If we're going to keep doing it from inside the pipeline like we're currently doing, then we need a way to get some sort of key material into the build task so that it can sign its attestation. And like managing long-lived keys is a thing that we don't want to do. Managing our own key rotation, I think, is a thing we don't want to do. And so keyless signing feels like the right way to do things. For us, for everybody, I mean, I think that it will require workload identity features at the cluster level. And all of a sudden I start to worry about, well, how are you going to run that on kind? Like, can you do that simply locally without having to be running in a managed cluster with like integration with AWS identity providers? The same thing like in a test, like if these tests are producing test attestations, does it make sense for something like chains to be sitting outside the test pipeline, and when it sees one complete, it produces a test attestation? Or is that more likely something that should be produced from inside the test pipeline to say, I'm a test, and here are the details of my result that I'm signing with my workload key? And chains just linking together the provenance of all that to say, I saw that run on this cluster in this place. Louis?
Yeah, a couple points. So for the workload identity, Red Hat just released this tech preview thing. So the Spiffy Spire project is the thing that does give you that workload identity. It's still tech preview. I don't know what's the upstream for this, but the claims is that eventually this will be something that you can run anywhere, even like on bare metal or something. So presumably, this may also work on something like OpenShift Local, CRC, or maybe even Kind. I don't know, but it's something that to keep an eye on if we do want to pursue workload identities. The other piece is that so chains, the scope of chains should be to generate source of provenance attestations, because it's the thing that it observes, it's the thing that it's sure about, and that's what it should generate and it should sign. A while back, I tried adding the ability for chains to sign SBOMs. So you would, report something in your pipeline saying like, "Hey, I built this SBOM," and chains will go ahead and sign that as another kind of attestation. And the more I started thinking about the problem, I backed away from it, because it's really easy to just trick chains into signing anything, right, when it comes to that pattern. So at that point, you kind of lose the the signature kind of loses its meaning. So it becomes pretty meaningless. If you can sign anything with that signature, you might as well just give the key to the signing key to the user. The provenance is different because the provenance is signing data that Chains has observed, right? That the user cannot lie about. So I think that's how I would see that. But maybe, what you're saying, Ralph, of, there are things that a pipeline can generate and can sign with its own identity, and Chains can be used as a cross-reference to be, yes, this was generated by a task that I trust. We can go ahead and trust this other signature. It becomes a little complicated, but whenever we talk about workload identities, we always back away from it because it's just so much easier to stuff things in the source of provenance, but that's clearly not what it's meant for. So I think we probably need to talk more about this and have more experimentation. But the good news is that it looks like we're moving towards a place where we may have workload identity in Kubernetes without having to rely on the IDP of like a cloud provider, for example, which I think that will open up interesting use cases for us to explore.
Awesome. Thank you, Louis. I'm looking at time. We're just a few minutes until the end of the call. Does anybody want to raise any other comments, or can we wrap up for today? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Ryan, for bringing both of the material for the topics. It was a good conversation, and I felt like a good use of our architecture call time. See you in the tubes.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.